Hi fellow Disney Plus watchers, this is Thoughts After a Disney Plus Watch and I'm glad you're watching. If this is your first time here, you're one of the early birds because this is one of the first videos I'm putting out. Something's popping up now that links to a video talking about what this channel will be. If you're someone who is interested in Disney Plus and like talking about it, this is a place for you. Today I'm ranking all of the episodes of The Mandalorian from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 16. I myself am a huge Star Wars fan, so this will be a little geeking out on my part. Make sure that when you have thoughts yourself, tell me in the comments, and of course I'm curious if you agree, but if you're not, that's even more interesting. There will be big spoilers here, so if you haven't seen all of Mandalorian, you can put this in your watch later list and come back when ready. Now, yesterday the second season ended, and of course I'm still thinking about it because this show lays so much groundwork for so much to come. I can't help but let my imagination run wild for what everything means for Star Wars TV in the future. When we get higher up the list, we'll get to episodes that are very impactful for the future of the so-called Filoniverse. I'm eating it up, it's so great. Let's start ranking this without wasting any more time. Coming in at the bottom is Chapter 5, The Gunslinger. This one is not a terrible episode by any means, but a very mediocre one. Not much happens of great meaning or consequence. The character of Mando often learns his lessons along the way, but in this side mission there is nothing like character building at all actually, it's just stuff happening. So Mando's ship needs repairing and he lands on Tatooine, the planet we all know from the original trilogy as Luke's home planet. So there are some callbacks going on here, but it's not as nostalgic as I would have expected, also because the town feels so different. Mos Eisley is a bit like the streets in 2020, just very empty. Of course there is a history there, but something about this episode feels cheap and empty. It probably had the smallest budget of them all, to be honest, it looks like it. Well, going on. Din, the Mandalorian, meets a young bounty hunter who wants to get into the guild. Mando helps him with a mission, there's a beautiful speeder bike sequence at night that is absolutely the high point of the episode, but everything else around it is not, it's not really special. A fine episode with some good original trilogy feels, but a bit forgettable. Next up, I'm ranking Chapter 4, Sanctuary. Din lands on a planet with the child, which name we now know is Grogu. The plan is to keep him safe here and stay hidden, but of course the two are totally not safe because this series doesn't end with episode 4. He meets up with this character Cara Dune from Alderaan, who plays a big part in the story later on in the series. Together they stop a group of Uruk-hai troll-like creatures who jeopardize a small town. Now, this episode is a little better than the previous one, partly because it's much more visually pleasing. The location pops more, it's living and breathing culture and history. The story is nothing really special and a bit predictable though. Not that predictability is a big sin in this series, but the story didn't really grab me. It has some good Clone Wars vibes. A small mission with locals fighting a common enemy, it was good. Not amazing, just a decent, bit predictable episode in a beautiful location. We do get some nice character moments between Mando and this woman that lives there and kinda has an eye on him. So that's kinda sweet. Moving on to Chapter 1, The Mandalorian. Now this one will become a classic in 20 years, isn't it? I mean, it's the first one, the first taste of what this series is gonna be. Funny enough, it has very different structure than most of the episodes, and I don't see a lot of people talking about this actually. Most of the episodes are an isolated adventure on a planet where a thing gets done and then it ties to the bigger narrative in a few small ways. This one is a planet hopping episode that plays out like a regular piece of TV and not like the isolated series of the week show that is becoming later. It puts the pieces in place, but it's actually not giving us a taste of what the gist of this series is gonna be. I didn't mind though, because the story is still well told. I remember seeing the episode with friends, feeling a bit underwhelmed. I now know why that was. It was thinking and expecting this episode to be an hour long back then, because that is what they kept telling us before the release. And we really didn't know why it was that important he met Grogu there. In hindsight and in greater perspective, this is actually a really good episode that has earned its place, besides having a very different structure than would later become usual for The Mandalorian. Let's move on to the next one. That would be Chapter 6, The Prisoner. Slowly but surely we're moving into the category amazing. Cause this series works so well for me that almost all of the episodes are wonderful. The world and specifically the characters of Mando's history are getting more attention in this chapter. Din helps a group of bounty hunters on a breakout mission, and these people all have different histories and relations with Mando, and later it's revealed that is exactly the reason why they can't be trusted. The action in this episode, wow, it's something else. There is a moment Din is taking out a group of guard droids and he uses like all his tools. The creators go big on the stunt work here. And the feeling and the atmosphere of the prison is really, really tense. The director Rick Famuyiwa, at least I think I'm pronouncing it right, he did great on the sets and the action on this one. With a fun story where you get to know Mando a bit more, next to some great action and set pieces, it makes for a good chapter. Okay, next up, we're at number 12, Chapter 3, The Sin. Okay, let me make this perfectly clear. I know what you're thinking. Why? This great story building episode with just big budget movie level directing, with the big moment of Mando realizing he made a mistake leaving the child on Navarro, with Mando becoming heroic and breaking the guild code. I know what you're thinking. Why is this one so low? Well, it's a testament for how freaking good this show is and has become. And don't you worry, I rewatched it. It's not just season 2 recency bias. I just love all these episodes so much. This one has made its way to number 12. This story focuses on Mando and bringing the child back to the client and working on his conscience along the way. The story is very effective and relatable, as it deals with themes like guilt and doing the right thing, even if that means losing your reputation. And the scene where Din is about to take off and recognizes the little knob missing in his ship, it just perfectly displays good storytelling and is quite emotional. The most Jon Favreau, or should I say Iron Man inspired visuals are on display when the Mandalorian gang decides to save Din and expose themselves. Lots of high points here, and it remains one of the more important episodes of the series. Just not one of my favorites per se, but the reason why isn't really explainable, besides this series being constantly as good as it is. The next one is going to be Chapter 2, The Child. I really have a soft spot for this one. Of course, this was the first chapter that showed what Mandalorian as a show was capable of. The small scale felt especially refreshing in contrast with the planet-hopping episode of Part 1. The Indiana Jones style action is exciting, the fight with the Mudhorn is perfect. I mean, that fight felt so good because of the physicality of it, the grittiness, you know? The humor is very well done too. The moment Din realizes he's been in that life-threatening fight with that beast and the Jawas just crack that egg open and start to eat it, very funny. Of course, the big reveal of the baby who saves Mando with the Force is foreshadowing a lot, and it's very important in the grand scheme of things and the choices that need to be made along the way. And also, can we talk about the Jawas? These little people are so iconic and bring a good dose of nostalgia in the mix without feeling forced, in my opinion. It's just great. All in all, the small scale, the adventurous feeling, the humor, the Force reveal make this a wonderful time. Going into the top 10, the next one would be Chapter 11, Vieiras. This episode also ranks lower than most people will probably rank it, but again, that's only a testament of how good I think this show is. This episode is the first time we meet a Clone Wars character, Bo-Katan. Now, in all fairness, it's not that I'm that hyped at all to see her, because it's not a character that resonated with me in huge ways like Ahsoka did, for instance. But still, it is refreshing and interesting to see a live-action translation. The creators did really well with the live-action interpretation. They chose the same actress who did the voice, and she totally fits visually and with her acting. The great thing about this episode is that Mando goes on a mission with her and her companions to ultimately fight for a greater purpose that's about Mandalore. So I really believe this will play a bigger part in this series as a whole, also looking at the season finale. But I'm glad that they didn't lose focus on the main storyline yet. The action is exciting and feels very much like a heist movie. The electric beats that were added by the composer also contributed to that unique feeling this episode is going for. The first part of the episode kind of feel a bit like Pirates of the Caribbean, and I love the fact that this season is going all in on different locations, which provide different tones and also very different set pieces. The moment Grogu is thrown into the water and that sea monster just absorbs that little guy was shocking to me and unexpected. It was also a great moment because it was a good showcase of how much Mando is starting to care about this child. Moving on, Chapter 15, The Believer. This is the only chapter that doesn't star Grogu. What this episode did for the character of Din was really important, and I just love this episode. So, this episode is the penultimate chapter of Season 2 and is essentially playing out like a side mission. Grogu is captured by Moff Gideon, and Mando and his crew need to get the location of his cruiser. They bring in Bill Burr's character Mayfeld to extract the information from a mining facility on a forest jungle-like planet called Morak. Mayfeld is of course the bounty hunter from episode 6, who now is a prisoner of the New Republic. So the premise already is a good starting point for a nice group mission adventure. The action and cinematography is really big in scale, and just too good for a TV episode. It's crazy. It reminded me a lot of Indiana Jones again, which isn't surprising because this director Rick Famuyiwa also did Chapter 2. A friend of mine pointed out to me that the episode also feels a lot like Mad Max, at least the chase where Mando and Mayfeld get captured by pirates. The episode also raises some interesting points about what to believe and who to believe in times of conflict and war. Mayfeld's comments about both sides, Republic and Empire, being essentially the same because, they still control people is really striking. And can we talk about the moment Din sacrifices his beliefs just to have a chance at saving Grogu and takes off his helmet? It's so great to see a bit of facial acting from Pedro Pascal. This episode is visually beautiful but also tense and makes you think about central themes of this show. Chapter 9, The Marshal, is the next one we're gonna talk about. You might have noticed by now I'm constantly praising every episode, and I started doing this after the bottom 3. I'm totally aware that it might not feel like a ranking anymore, because everything's just positivity. Well, I would be lying or downright looking for the smallest nitpicks, because this show keeps on delivering for me. The Marshal is the first of season 2, and in this one, Mando is still looking for another Mando, only to find out that the Mando Marshal he meets isn't actually a Mando. So yeah, the Marshal, Cobb Vanth, needs Din's help, and in return he will give his Mandalorian armor to Din, because Din ain't having this. It's like a huge insult to him that he's wearing an armor from a culture this man has nothing to do with. The dynamic between the Marshal and Din is really great in the beginning because of this distrust, but the two do work together to fight a crate dragon, which I didn't know what that was until I looked it up, but this creature looked really good. If you would tell me that this episode has the highest budget of them all, I would believe you instantly. Like, I don't know for sure, but I think it has. The final fight where that aspect ratio is expanding and Cobb Vanth and Mando are trying everything to slay this beast, it just looks gorgeous. I really recognized the directing of Jon Favreau in this because of the Iron Man-like shots in here. The desert of Tatooine was a perfect display for this episode, just because this show is so damn western, every sense of the word. When I talked to friends about this episode, some of them said it was too predictable because it's repeating western tropes shamelessly, actually. And I get it, it does, but it just works. The standoff in the bar, the villagers looking with suspicion to the stranger cowboy riding into town, fighting a common enemy and growing over a long time feud, those kinds of tropes work to me very well, actually. And wow, the music. This episode has one of my favorite scores of the series. So tribal, so warm and acoustic. I dig it. Okay, enough about this episode. We can talk about this one for days. Sitting at number 8, it's Chapter 10, The Passenger. I think this is my most controversial pick, because I feel like this is gonna be one of those forgotten episodes, along with Chapter 5, The Gunslinger, for example. I don't know this, but I have the feeling it will, because a lot of people see this as unnecessary filler and nothing special. I disagree. So it's not having a lot of ties to the main goal of the story. Mando gets a new lead to a Mandalorian, we later find out that's Bo-Katan, but first crash lands on an icy planet after being chased by New Republic police. Okay, before I go on, I have to talk about that chase. It's beautiful. I wish we got to see that on a 3D IMAX screen or something, because the imagery was really grand and just perfect. So, Din has a passenger. She's called Frog Lady in the credits on IMDb. She has some unborn children and Grogu is loving them and eating them like snacks. This new synth theme that plays with it is literally called Snacks in the album. Okay, so the whole point of this episode is to get out of there before these eggs freeze to death, but they first have to fix the ship and deal with horror spiders. Enough about the story itself. I really want to talk about the visual tone of this episode, which I feel is very unique. Lots of very memorable imagery, like the frozen Beskar armor, the X-Wings, the spider army, and the hot tub in that cave. Man, I was really just enchanted by this scene, where you feel that there is something going on when the frog lady disappears and Mando goes in with Grogu. Lots of things went through my head, like, is she okay? What's hiding in this ice cave? The director Peyton Reed did a great job at putting me on the edge of my seat. One thing I associated the tone of the episode with, and it might just be me, but I got Dark Crystal vibes. I know, nobody is saying this, and I think it's because that movie also really put a spell on me like this episode did. But yeah, a lot of people will forget this episode because they think it's mediocre, and that's totally cool, but yeah, I'm really loving this chapter. We're at number 6, and I'm picking Chapter 7, The Reckoning. Avengers Infinity War, anyone? The story where every hero we have met in the season are coming together, putting away their differences and fighting the big bad of the story. I'm just associating this episode with Avengers Infinity War. Maybe that's funny to you, I don't know, but that's how it feels to me. So this is essentially the first part of one chapter in the story. First of all, just love the twist they gave IG-88. It serves good humor and good heart. So this droid gets reprogrammed so he can protect the child. One of the most important things in this chapter is the dynamic between him and Din Djarin. Because our Mando, he doesn't trust droids at all, but kinda gets forced to leave that comfort zone. Because this droid is so useful and important to the mission. This chapter really is one of the most important episodes of the season by far, because it puts all the pieces in place. And is a coming back from a bunch of side quests. I was so hyped for the finale when I finished watching it, even more than the 7th episode of season 2. There was so much at stake here, and much of the tragedy already happened. Of course, I'm talking about the death of Quill, which was, I think, the first moment of Mandalorian when I was actually teary-eyed. The way his death was handled was tense and subtle. There wasn't a fallen hero cliché with a last monologue because no one was there to see him go. It was heartbreaking to just see him lie there on the ground after an off-screen kill, which built the tension to this moment. Love the episode, it got me going for the finale. Now, before I'm jumping into the top 5, thank you for going with me this far. This is one of my first videos, but I will say this: if you like these kinds of analysis and rankings, maybe consider hitting the subscribe button. Next week I will give you my review of Soul, and the week after we'll look back at Disney Plus from 2020. And when WandaVision comes out, I'm going to cover the episodes every week. Again, you can check out the introduction video on the channel. Thank you for watching so far. Let's move on to the top 5 Mandalorian episodes. Chapter 12, The Siege. This one gives me really cozy original trilogy feels, and that's a big pro. So this episode is essentially a mission to destroy an Empire facility, and bigger secrets are discovered about the plans the Empire has with Grogu. Mando joins Greef Karga and Cara Dune from Season 1, and they manage to destroy the facility, but not without a fight. The chase sequence through the mountains is really exciting and well filmed, and the last dogfight between the Razor Crest and that TIE fighter is just cinema level epic. I really loved the touches of humor that Blue Creature Mythrol brings. I love the playfulness of the action set pieces, which really show that there is a Star Wars fan working on this stuff. Also, the huge thing about this episode was the tape from Dr. Pershing, who worked with Werner Herzog's character in Season 1, along with the tanks full of mysterious-looking Snoke-like bodies. It really was the first big episode of the season in terms of the main story. And the main reason this is so high up my list is because I really believe this chapter is the best summary of what this show is, along with Star Wars in general. It has your typical Star Wars hallway shootouts, dogfights, Force-related reveals, a comic relief, and lots of cute father-son dynamics between Mando and Grogu. Number 4, Chapter 13, The Jedi. This is of course the episode with Ahsoka, about whom I want to talk about first, because this chapter feels like a big love letter to the character. Her translation to live action is just really well done. From the fighting style to the prosthetics and attitude, a beautiful scene is when she meets Grogu and goes to talk to him. This is when we learn Grogu's name, and I must say it's a pretty perfect name, the longer I think about it. I associate the tone with frog reptile-like creatures and fits his kinda derpy cute face, I think. This chapter has definitely one of the most refreshing tones the show went for. This episode plays out entirely on a planet that feels like something I hear people refer to as Space Japan. It definitely is very much that vibe. The story plays out around a village that's under total control of a magistrate that lives in great wealth while the town is in terrible, terrible poverty. It's a striking setting and the colors and tones are wonderful. It's like there's a thick green foggy layer added in every scene, and I thought to myself, wow, this must be the most color graded episode in the entire series, and it doesn't even feel overdone. And I think the most important reason this episode ranks so high in my list is because of how much it means to the greater narrative of Star Wars. Grogu apparently started training at the Jedi Temple around the time of Order 66, and Ahsoka reveals he now needs to find another master to finish his training. These story points are amazing reveals and puts this tale of the Mandalorian in a greater perspective. For this reason, and of course because of the beautiful directing and atmosphere, this episode sits at my number 4. Coming in at number 3 would be Chapter 14, The Tragedy, also known as the episode where the Mandalorian laughs. Just kidding, not really, but that laugh he had after calling Grogu by his name, so great. It's really something that this show makes you care so much about. Small moments like this that surprise you a bit. At least to me, it was a funny surprise hearing Mando laugh, because we know him as this stoic person who just ignores people and looks away. Although I'll admit that I know Mando has become more talky, you can say. His lines have definitely increased past few episodes, and here he even delivers a monologue where he talks to Grogu and convinces himself that he needs a teacher. Okay, Mando's talking habits aside, this one was a huge attraction from start to finish. Let's talk about Boba Fett, because no, I'm one of those people that wasn't a Boba Fett fanatic, most obvious in the original trilogy where he was basically an extra. But in this chapter, he has his resurrection, and man, he is a badass. And I think everything has been discussed to death already, but I love his fighting style and the raw, almost R-rated feeling of the combat at display. The story here follows Mando and Grogu to Tython, and I heard a lot of people complaining about this planet, that it's too simple and doesn't carry any mystical vibes, and that is absolutely true. In Legends, Tython was a very mystical snowy planet. Here is just some green hills. So nothing special about the location, but for me, not really a sin, because the location actually provided an accessible way to film in real life, instead of in the volume, that screen room. This live surrounding was better suited for this episode because of all the combat, all the rocks thrown at stormtroopers and that kind of stuff. I was constantly on the edge of my seat during this short half hour. I think this is the only episode where I literally screamed like a little girl for the entire runtime. Well, maybe the finale, but we'll get to that. It starts and it just won't stop. The Dark Troopers in action, Grogu captured, Razor Crest getting destroyed, and wow, the thrilling set pieces. It's funny that the Razor Crest getting broken or destroyed for good was one of the things that were on my wish list while I was watching this season. Not that I think it isn't an iconic ship, but it began to overstay its welcome in my opinion. Almost every episode starts with the Razor Crest flying to yet a new planet, and it's awesome that we're getting some nice change of pace. Chapter 8, Redemption, is my number 2. Remember when we got Chapter 7 on Wednesday, Rise of Skywalker on Friday, and this episode the Friday after that? Those were some insane Star Wars weeks, and this chapter just ended those weeks with a bang. I'm going to be short on this one because I think this video can only be so long. I can talk to you about this chapter for literally half an hour. I won't, so I'll briefly talk about some big moments. The Scout Troopers abusing baby Grogu and having a conversation. New style of humor in Star Wars, loved it. IG-88 racing into town and showing his skills, killing an army of stormtroopers, perfection. The flashback about the Death Watch saving young Din Djarin, chilling and nice to have the final piece of that memory. The Lady Armorer kicking ass and shattering stormtrooper armor reminds me of Robert Rodriguez's Chapter 14 in hindsight. IG-88 sacrificing itself in the lava river and Din finding out he now loves him a robot, full circle. Mando flying on the TIE Fighter trying to take out Moff Gideon. A shame they showed that in the trailer, by the way. The Darksaber reveal. Now the show reveals itself and promises us that it will be a lot more than just a bounty hunter finding his next job. Now we know this will tie in with Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels in major ways. That moment, the Darksaber. That's when we knew this is gonna be bigger. Bigger and better. Only one left, and that is, of course, Chapter 16, The Rescue. Okay, there's actually one flaw I see in this episode, and I want to start with it because I want to get it out of the way. It doesn't affect my appreciation for this episode in a big way, not at all. It's just Luke. I loved his scene. I loved that he was with R2. I loved the build-up and the fight with the Death Troopers. Great introduction, great connection there with Grogu also. And I almost cried when he left Din and Din gives Grogu his last present, his first and maybe final look at his face. The classical music rendition of The Mandalorian. Wow. That whole scene around Luke was really memorable. Except maybe the CGI, but that's forgiven. But I'm just wondering what this will mean for the future of Luke and the events of the sequel trilogy. I really hope they don't start to overwrite the sequels. And they haven't done this in the slightest yet, so I'm all good so far, but there's just been so much talk about ignoring the sequel trilogy, and I really, really hope they don't do this. It's a worry, maybe this is unjustified, but I'm just picturing this series and series like Ahsoka and Rangers of the New Republic to move so far in the future in years to come that the stories may arrive into the era of the sequels, and I don't want them to mess with them. And CGI Luke being there, being the ultimate hero, seeing the criticisms people have about The Last Jedi and the broken hero story, I can't imagine Lucasfilm looking at those criticisms and deciding, well, the sequels shouldn't happen, and boom, there it goes. But yeah, tell me in the comments I'm wrong. This is becoming a small nitpick blown way out of proportion. Because what a thrill ride this episode was. What the actual frick has happened? You can go to other reviews and YouTubers giving you a recap or walkthrough if you want, because all of this just has to sink in, and I want this ranking out. I was in awe of what I saw. The entire episode, from second one to second last. That fight between the Dark Trooper and Mando, the Darksaber fight after the altering of the deal from Gideon, the reveal that Bo-Katan can't take the Darksaber because she needs to win it in battle, the Dark Trooper army being a real threat, the kidnapping of Dr. Pershing and taking that Imperial cruiser, the shoot-off with Cara, Fennec, Bo-Katan, it's kick-ass, and then after the credits, a beautiful tease of an unexpected, well, not entirely, but not yet unannounced Boba Fett series, the Book of Boba Fett. Does this mean we won't get Season 3 of The Mandalorian? Or is he going to retake Mandalore with Bo-Katan and friends? There is a story to tell here, but I don't know. So many exciting possibilities. So many exciting possibilities. Okay, I want to leave it at this. This episode ranks at number 1, just above Redemption, because it was the biggest, boldest thrill I've had in Mandalorian. Peyton Reed and Jon Favreau delivered. I will go more in depth with future Disney Plus episodes as we follow them weekly. This has just been my ranking, and I want to get it out. Okay, to wrap this up, it's obvious I'm a huge Star Wars and Mandalorian fan. If you like this ranking, make sure to follow me because we will dive into WandaVision next month, as well as covering the Star Wars series, Pixar shorts, Disney originals, you name it. Without wasting more time, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day and see ya.